The Fellowship of the Ring is one of the world's most renowned fantasy stories. In both movie and book form, it has been widely praised. At this point, there is no reason for anyone to write a review of it or try to do a deep study, because they've all been done before. So, when I decided to analyze it as my final project, I had trouble deciding what I wanted to focus on. I could have done the mise-en-scène and pointed out the numerous detailed sets and costumes of Middle-earth. I could have observed the sound and the music, and spoken for hours on how certain characters had their own themes, and how the music blended in with the scenes. But then, when watching through, I noticed a very specific detail on how the scenes in this film were shot. Almost every shot in the film was handheld, and included a great deal of camera movement. The aerial shots were intentionally made to look as if they were filmed by drones, even in the CGI shots. I also noticed a variety of very interesting camera techniques that were used to make the world look more real or more fantastical. After making these discoveries, I knew what I wanted to study in Fellowship of the Ring. I wanted to study its cinematography. Before I get to my first point, I want to explain the style of the Fellowship. This is a film that likes to show the differences between different locations visually. I don't just mean that the set dressing is different or that the walls are different colors. They try to get across the feeling of an area visually. This is done through editing, lighting, and establishing shots. I have a quote from Steve Stockman that explains this philosophy. We must give them the information they need in a way that they can understand. It means being obvious and thinking about our video as the audience will. They do this to get across the feeling of different locations in a fantasy setting, to show evil or good visually. Take, for example, the difference between Hobbiton and Bree. Hobbiton is bright green and full of people who are just doing some work or having fun. Bree is dark and rainy. The trees are barely even green. Everything is tall and imposing, and we get shots like this, where we look through a group of people to show how crowded the area is. Because of this choice, it can be hard for the director to maintain realism in the film. This is a fantasy story, but they also want it to be realistic. So, in order to accomplish this goal, they shifted the focus of the camera's cinematography to realism. Every shot is meant to make you feel as if you are there in that scene. When people are shot from above, the camera is carefully placed, not too high above the head and not too low either. When a scene is an establishing shot, our camera flies like a drone, even when the shot is CGI. This tricks our brain into perceiving this film in such a way that the strange visual style appears more normal, and we are sucked into the story, without our immersion being broken. So, now that you understand why they chose to do their cinematography this way, allow me to give you some examples and prove this visual style is intentional. Observe this scene of Saruman building his Uruk army. Do you see how the camera flies around, swooping and diving, dodging obstacles ahead of time, speeding up when it flies downwards, and slowing when it moves up? Why would they make a camera in a fully CGI generated scene move in such a way? Its naturalness is almost exaggerated, as if the camera is mimicking the way a bird or a drone might fly in that situation. This camera movement is not some strange decision that is made only once. The camera flies like this every time that there is an establishing shot. There's also the fact that the camera is almost always handheld. It also becomes shakier and moves or cuts more in scenes of high stress. The camera seems to operate in tandem with the emotions of the characters, which not only gives a visual indicator of how stressed out they are feeling, like in this scene with Bilbo, but it also helps us feel like we are there in the scene. This combination of different realistic camera techniques is what keeps this fantastical and visually stunning story grounded. and I think that it is one of its best aspects as a film. Now, that is all of my analysis of how the cinematography was used to add realism to this unrealistic world. But I would be remiss if I forgot to also mention some great camera angles and tricks which were used for other aspects of the film. The Fellowship used high and low camera angles to make characters appear intimidating and show who has control in certain scenes. This was used to good effect in the scene where Frodo declares that he will take the ring to Mordor. Despite him being way shorter than everyone else in the room, the camera is at his eye level until everyone turns to look at him, and the camera switches to a high angle on him, showing how afraid he is now that everyone is listening. The movie also manages to use low angles and high angles interchangeably when showing power. When someone has power over another person, the camera will often go from a low angle on that person to a high angle reaching over that person's shoulder, looking down. It's a clever way to get variety in your camera angles, while still communicating the same feeling. There is also a great camera trick which I must mention, which was used very often in this film. It is called forced perspective, and it is used to make people appear very small. This is a great cinematography magic trick, and it is how the hobbits were made to look small in this film. It's hard for me to explain how it works in my own words, so here's how it was explained in a behind the scenes video.
Do a motion control move where you have the one actor on a moving platform. So when the camera moves, you're doing your moves all relative. So you're literally sliding the guy along on the floor as your motion control move motion control camera is moving along.
You have the camera on a motion control dolly, making it move in and out or side to side. But you have another smaller dolly that's electronically hooked to it and does the exact same motion, but sort of in a counter movement. But every time you move one way on one dolly, the other one immediately responds.
When you're actually viewing it, you're basically doing a split.
In the shot where Frodo is pouring tea for Gandalf at a table, and the camera kind of crabs past from one side of the table to the other side. And in that instance, Ian McKellen was actually sitting on a dolly that was actually moving him slightly on a small-scale table with small-scale props. And it was not too far from a full-size table, a Frodo-size table with larger Frodo-size props.
You see, cinematography has a much larger effect on the film overall than you probably thought. After all, it is integral to a movie's overall visual design. Paul Rand once said, "Design is the method of putting form and content together. Design, just as art, has multiple definitions. There is no single definition. Design can be art, or design can be aesthetics." Now that I have explained all of this, I wouldn't be surprised if you want to go and see for yourself if what I have said is true. Well, I would encourage you to go and watch The Fellowship of the Ring, but I must warn you, it is a pretty long movie. However, I would say that its long runtime is definitely worth it for its great story and cinematography.